Good. How are you?
Can't complain. I'm in my happy place. All right. So I am really excited to dig in on this with you. It doesn't matter how many times we talk, I always learn something new. So I want to talk about, let's start at the premise, right? When you think about starting a business, a lot of us think that you got to be bold, right? You got to go out, full tilt, 100%, and really like throw yourself into it. But you insist that it is important to start small. Let's talk about why that is.
Yes. Well, there's so many reasons. The first reason is because starting a business feels oftentimes like this big mountain. And when it feels that way, it often like stunts our ability to start and to try. And the other reason for it is that you want to test things in small, cheap, mini ways to prove and test and iterate. All of that also has to do with potentially just your own lifestyle and financials, meaning sometimes people are deciding, should I quit and then go start a business? So this also, another reason for this is you're figuring out your own career and how you fit in. And entrepreneurship, I mean, it's, oftentimes this early sacrifice that hopefully pays off in the long run. But, financially, you also want to think about how are you going to make that work. And so testing it, even on the side of a job, is a way of avoiding some risk. There's so much experimentation and iteration and pivoting and testing that inherently has to happen. So doing that early and in small ways and frequently is a great rule of thumb. So I think benefit is like the ability to just get started at all, right? And then preventing some of those like bigger risks. Those are some of the reasons. I'm sure there's more, but that's the quickly what's coming to my head.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, you make a really good point there, because there are a lot of people that have these ideas, but maybe can't pursue them, especially in the way that you wanted to. And it's one of the things that we talk about a lot at Power to Fly is like, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. And so that, things are better done than in process, or don't worry, it'll get better. So I love this idea of not only do you get to start small so that you can kind of fail quickly in case, so that way, like you said, it's smaller mistakes to fix. But I think that that's a really good point about leaving your options open. I think if there's nothing else we've all learned in the last 3 years, it is that nothing is guaranteed. So I think I think that's smart to try and, make a go of this in a way that's not, hopefully erasing, future opportunities or taking away choices from you. Okay, so let's talk about when you started. I want to know what some of the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur were that helped you to realize why starting small was the way to go.
Yes. Let's see. There's so many things. Okay. Where can I begin here? There's so many directions. Like, I think sometimes like there's the fear and the mindset around it. There's not always having the guidance on how to know how to start and what is right. And again, that feeling of like perfection, like entrepreneurship is often like, no one's going to exactly teach you what to do. It's just having to put in those different, what is one next step forward, and asking yourself that every single day. So for me in the early days, like you said, there were ups and downs, but some of those good early steps that were like small, I'm thinking of one in particular where I found a community. That's one small step you could take. I was part of like an NYU sort of entrepreneurship startup lab. I forget the exact name of it, but finding a community is actually one small but critical step. You might find mentors, resources, even a physical co-working space, things like that. I mean, there's so much to be said for just getting other support around you and opinions and guidance, especially when you're stepping into like, I'm not really sure what to do and how this is all going to go. So community and whatnot, that's actually one small step forward. So I was physically in that working space. I had some folks I could sort of ask a little bit. I started my first like pitch deck. I am a very bad designer, so it didn't like look great, but it was a way of getting my thoughts on paper, which to me, for any entrepreneur, if I'm coaching an entrepreneur, like you know, sometimes we just have these ideas running around, like literally getting your thoughts onto a Google Doc or even handwritten or slides. Doesn't have to look amazing, but sometimes just fleshing it out, like you'd be surprised how much you can almost coach yourself and be like, okay, what's the problem? What are some ideas around the model? What's the competitors? Like, what could be the pricing? And like all of a sudden, you might even start to ask yourself some of these questions, and you don't need all the answers, but you'd be surprised what naturally starts to flow when you start to write or digitally represent your ideas. And then you could put that in front of someone, and then all of a sudden they're giving you feedback and questions, and their questions are going to prompt you to go find those answers. So I did an early slide deck. I also created, if you've ever heard of an MVP, right, minimum viable product. And so I created, it was on Typeform, which is just like a quiz survey tool. That was my earliest version of a career assessment. So I was digitizing some things I used to do in conversation. So if you're thinking of any sort of tech-oriented business, any free tool, I've used Google Sheets, I've used Typeform as like early products that people started to pay for, even though you might even use a free tool to actually build it out yourself. Wow. The other thing I don't want to forget is there were several years that I was doing like customer discovery that I actually didn't even realize I was doing that. So, you know, if you're going in intentionally, customer discovery is another amazing early step where, and again, you guys can like Google this, but customer discovery has a very, there's a way of asking questions to your target market without leading them, so you really understand their pain points, because you might have assumptions that you think this is the problem they need help with, and then when you talk to 10, 20, 30 people, you find other patterns and you really strengthen. You have to sort of forego your own ideas for a second and like really see what you're hearing. And I was doing that kind of for years without realizing it. So that's another early step you can take. There's guidance free online about how to run those calls. If you did 10, 20, 30 calls with your target market, like, wow, you're going to be buzzing with patterns and what are their pain points. And all of a sudden, you're going to start to connect the dots of how can I potentially help these people. So that's a lot of the good things that I didn't really touch on, some of the down points, and I'm happy to do that. Entrepreneurship is not always a smooth sailing, you know, experience, but I wanted to just give you like some of my earliest, you know, some of those small steps that I took.
Yeah, I love that. So when you think of it in terms of, you know, weighing the pros against the cons, obviously you have done this before, so I'm assuming you are, you know, you would do it again given the opportunity. What do you think are some of the cons that people should maybe keep in mind as they're considering, you know, whether they are making the right choice, whether they're you know, moving in the right direction? You know, what are some of the cons that maybe you didn't think of when you were first starting out?
Well, first and foremost, you should learn about entrepreneurship before you even start pursuing it, because you might like the same way I would suggest someone to network with anyone in any role. If you were considering pursuing it, you might talk with 5 or 10 entrepreneurs, and it looks different for every founder, but you may realize, actually, given what this requires, this isn't even right for me. And maybe there's other ways of being entrepreneurial within a job. So there's just first and foremost understanding what you're sort of getting into and what it really looks like and what it feels like and what it takes to assess if it's even right for you. That's the first thing to do. The other things I didn't maybe realize, I think what we've alluded to here a little bit is like being comfortable with that ambiguity, the messiness, like, you know, nothing is perfect, being comfortable with like any progress is better than none. Not everyone's like that. And you just have to know if that's your personality or if you could adjust to that. That's a pretty uncomfortable feeling for many of us. So knowing your style and your personality, knowing that you will have to make decisions without having all the information. That's another trait that's really difficult, but also deciding which decisions are worth taking longer to gather information and think through, or do I have to move quickly, right? These are elements of a leader that are not always easy, but are required. What are the other cons? Managing people in general is hard, but when it's like your baby and your product, like you're going to have to be okay with people making mistakes, even though they're like sort of, I don't want to say on your behalf, but like part of your team, for your team. Trusting people, training people. And that's really hard in the early days when you don't really have resources to find the talent you need. So how do you get around that? What else? I don't know if I'm sort of going in the direction you were aiming for, but
no, I think these are great things. Yeah. No, I think this is excellent. And y'all, I see we've got some new people joining the chat here. So if you've got questions, please feel free to send them in. I would love to ask Rachel whatever y'all would like to know today. Okay, so we talked a little bit about some of the fundamental steps, right? You talked about client discovery or customer discovery. What do you think are some other like really like foundational building block you cannot skip this?
Yeah. Number one would be choosing a problem or topic area that you actually care about. I think it takes a special person to just identify like a gap or a product and like they're not connected to it and they can still weather all the storms and find that resilience and find that persistence and find that drive for years in the making to build the business where it has to be. Some people, like if you think of like a franchise owner, like there are some people where that might be right for you if you want to just lead a certain business model. But like for most of us driving a business or building a business, truly authentically caring about what it is. I know it sounds fluffy, but like in reality, the only way you're going to want to keep going. And by the way, it requires a lot of time to get things off the ground. I'm not saying it has to be slow, and I'm not saying it's not going to grow where you want it to, but it does take consistent effort. That's like one of the secret ingredients where you'd be surprised what you could just do if you were to just spend years on something. But what's going to allow you to stick with it for years? It's the deep caring, and you can't make that up and you can't fake it and you can't create it out of thin air. You got to really reflect on like, in my life, what am I connected to? What do I find, is so broken that needs fixing, something that people deserve, something the world is missing, something that we don't have sufficient support on, something that I could scream to the rooftop, something that I care about, but why do you care about it? So truly reflect in those early days. That I would say you can't go without. Some of those other I mentioned earlier, like comfort with ambiguity, being able to trust people. And these are things you could grow and adapt, but some of these just may or may not align naturally with who you already are. What are the other things? Customer discovery, MVPs, starting small, testing things, experimenting. The other interesting thing about an early business, and like most like marketing books will tell you this, is you actually have to like go out and find your early customers. So a lot of people think like, if I'm just going to post on social media, like people are going to come find me. It is very possible that people who truly have the problem that you need may not like see your social media post. And that's not always don't just rely on like, I'm sharing this and no one's coming. You really have to learn a lot, and early building demand is very different than what's going to happen over the years to come. Once you build visibility and build your reach, that's very different. But in the early stage,
it reminds me of when you're nope, it just went out of my head. It was a connection to multi-level marketing. Oh, that's what it was. I think it's a really good point what you're saying here, because that I feel like managing social stuff in a marketing sense versus managing the social media in a personal sense is completely different. And that is not something that I ever understood until the day I joined the marketing team with Power to Fly. And I was like, oh, okay, I know how to do this from a personal perspective, but now I have a whole new learning curve. And it's on like, let's Instagram, like something that I have familiarity with, all that kind of stuff. And so I think it is really important to highlight that, you know, you really do need to try and figure out why you're doing this, why this is something that you are passionate about, and why it's something that you need to do as opposed to someone else.
Oh, that's a great point too. Like, what should you do yourself in the early days versus like when should someone else be involved? I mean, in the beginning, you're kind of going to do a lot of everything. I do think also in the beginning, it's helpful to have like at least one person by your side, even if it's like an intern, even if a friend's willing to help you for a month or two. And then eventually try to find people with like a mutual beneficial interest, even if you can't pay them, like whether it's a graduate student or an undergrad, if they want like a 3 or 6 month internship and the ability to call themselves a marketing manager or like a tech leader or whatever you need. Yeah. Sometimes the resume builder is the way to get the talent. Like they're going to learn, they're going to get an experience, and then you're going to get the time and support. So that's like a way in the beginning to figure out how to get help. But yes, you do want to think about like another startup principle is sort of like do each job first so that when you hire, you know what it actually entails. So you have to be willing to like, you may not like doing everything, the marketing, the social, the financials, the sales and the technology and all of that.
Logistics, shipping, like production, you could be involved in all stages of this.
But knowing how to do it at least a few times, if not more yourself, will help you hire the right person. So learning to do it yourself can be uncomfortable, but yes, that's another sort of principle of like, do it yourself first so you know how to hire.
I like that. Okay. All right. When we're talking about this in terms of like, when should people know, or how do you think it should present when you know that it's kind of time to scale up or like take on more, expand, grow? Do you think that it's something that each person knows for themselves? Is it, you know, is there like a checklist of like, if you've hit 3 out of 5 on this list, you should grow? You know, what is your take on this?
Well, you always want to be like striving to grow, but I think I know what you're saying. Like you want to get an initial proof of concept, and then you want to say, okay, I think this is working. Let me expand on it. But it's kind of a constant stream of let me get out there. Let me test if there's demand. And if there is, I'm going to deliver my product or service. I'm going to gather feedback, and I'm going to continuously improve and advance and adjust our offerings to be better suited to our audience. And then you're like constantly trying to build that demand and sell, as well as advancing your product, sort of all at the same time. But there is an initial, like, maybe every business is different. And you want to see some general, you want to come up with the metrics that would make sense for your product or service to see like, are people converting? That's going to show you the price point. If it's like, you know, are you getting leads? And then are they converting, right? You're going to get to know the marketing of like, are they even finding out about me? And when they do, are they navigating through? And where in the funnel are we seeing challenges? And that's going to tell you what we need to adjust. And then if they're getting through and you're offering the product or service, are they getting the value? And then you need to come up with your own metrics depending on what are the top 1 or 2 or 3 metrics based on the value you are expecting to deliver. And if you're not, and then ideally they fill out some feedback where you can actually measure what they're experiencing. And if they're getting that value, great. If not, adjust it. And then there's no like perfect, like, oh, you've done this for 5 or 10 or 20 customers. Like try to come up with metrics that feel good enough. And then, yeah, you're kind of always trying to like grow in advance anyway, but you're right that you wouldn't want to like be too focused on expansion too quickly if there's still critical things on the product to test and refine. So yeah, initial proof of concept, figure out what that means for you. And then of course, you know, expanding, but it's kind of like you're always trying to expand.
Well, so you highlight that, and that's a really good point, right? Because this idea of like scale up, expand, grow, these are nebulous terms. These are something that is, it's subjective. Yeah. So when you are talking about, you know, scaling up, I think a lot of people think of it in terms of, you know, stuff that we've seen on social, right? You know, people start out shipping from their Etsy shop from their house, and eventually they expand to a warehouse. If that is not necessarily what success looks like to you, what are some other things that might be that success and would indicate that you're scaling up your business? Is it things like, you know, like adding more products or going to more luxe materials? upping, like, is it something that's that simple for like something like pricing, or are there, is growth kind of necessary on a specific scale, no matter what the business is?
Definitely not necessary for every business. I mean, you might just say, I want a small business, and you can come up with whatever metrics. Every entrepreneur should have their own vision of ultimately, where do I want to get this, and what would make me happy for my lifestyle? Like, why am I doing this? And what is the ultimate end point that I would like to push it towards? Not everyone has to grow to some crazy unicorn. There are many, and I should know the number, but just small to medium-sized businesses in the US and globally. And that's a great place to be, but you just have to know your own goal. And to your point, yes, like every business is going to have a different set of goals or roadmap. And that's really partially your choice as a leader, but it will ultimately lead towards the bigger vision. So to your point, yes, you might want higher price point, less customers. You might want higher quality materials, or you may want more revenue streams, more offerings, or you may want lower price point, more scalability, and more customers. There's any number. You might want to like license it out to people. It depends on the business model. It depends on sort of personally what you want and what you're good at, and what model, it partially a choice, but partially what model makes sense for you, and also what model makes sense in the market that's going to do well. But there's operations behind the scenes. So if you decide higher price point, less customers, or lower price point, more customers, that's more of the style of the business you want to run. You could kind of decide whichever way to go. But again, that also is based on the competitive market. What are you offering? And, do you want to have a differentiator, or do you just want to have something works and recreate a model that you've seen before, but maybe your local community needs that? So there's a lot of ways to make decisions about your business and the way you want to run it. I would say keeping in mind the market, as well as keeping in mind what's right for you.
No, I like that. No, I think that's an excellent list for people. Thank you. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about: how can our viewers find out more about you, more about your work? What should they know about WOKEN? Let's talk all of this.
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably my number one place, but our website is iamwoken.com. Basically, we offer career coaching. So we do help people with entrepreneurship, but a majority of what we do is, professionals who are not really sure their direction. You might need help with upskilling, personal branding, job searching, networking, interviewing, career exploration, any and all career things. But if you are debating, being a freelancer or starting something, I have and do coach people on that journey. So having a coach just simply helps you say, what are those small next steps? How do I have that progress, productivity, momentum, accountability, and another pair of eyes and ears? So happy to help with really any and all professional goals. So yeah, LinkedIn, my full name, Rachel Serwetz, iamwoken.com. That's our website. And on social, you can find us. Either our handle is WOKEN or Get WOKEN.
Loving all of this. All right. I have a couple questions that I usually try and ask people, especially if we have time, just things that occur to me. So one of my favorite questions is, what is something that people don't ask about that you wish that they would? Something that's about entrepreneurship that they should know, but it's just a question that nobody thinks to ask.
It's a really good question. I think what we haven't touched on today is just all the different avenues and just really learning about it. I think a lot of people just think like venture capital is like the only way to go, and it's just definitely not. So
you're talking in terms of funding, right?
Yes. So meaning, I think something people don't know to ask or research or think about is just how you would go about with the, financial resources are a major element of your choice and the model and the strategy. Some businesses just require a certain type of fundraising. Like if you're going to need inventory, if you're going to need manufacturing, if there's some specific reason that you need to raise VC funding, that's one thing. But I think it's important for prospective founders to learn from different entrepreneurs who somebody bootstrapped, somebody had grants, somebody did crowdfunding. And by the way, there's equity crowdfunding, and then there's cash crowdfunding. There's loans, there's accelerators, incubators. You know, there's a lot of public grants and there's just so many programs out there. And even just resources in other programs, whether it's, you know, getting co-working space, getting mentorship, getting discounts on software and tools, and getting a community of people around you. Those are programs and resources that can be immensely helpful. And bootstrapping. So especially for like a software company, we offered a lot of those free to build early tools that started earning us money. And then when you do that, you're proving demand, and you can use that incoming revenue to build the next better version. So I would just make sure you're not like assuming just that VC route, because it's important to understand the numbers of like how many people go after VC, how many people get funded, and how many of those companies even succeed. And I should know these numbers off the top of my head, but I will just tell you, when anyone tells me, it's like 3%, 1%. And I don't mean that in a discouraging way. I just mean be smart. And if you really think entrepreneurship is for you, figure out like the avenues and the options. And you just don't want to like spend 6, 9, 12 months fundraising and then be like, oh, my business failed. Like maybe it would have been different if you just sort of, there are ways to be creative and scrappy, oftentimes without relying on the obvious or known route that we are often made aware of.
I absolutely love that call out. And thank you for highlighting that, because I feel like you're right. Funding is something that we did not talk about in this chat, but it is hugely impactful. You know, the ability to get funding or not might be the difference between whether you can do this job or not, you know, between whether you can start this or, you know, and there's plenty of us out there who are not resourced enough to be able to say, all right, well, I'm quitting my job and then I'm going to make this work. So I think it's really awesome that you kind of highlight, you know, don't be discouraged by this. Just know that this is a lot of research and a lot of learning and a lot of, you know, decisions basically that you're going to have to make before anything is really started or like, you know, kicked off the ground. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay, Rachel, this is going to bring us to the end of time, but I just want to say huge thank you. I always love talking to you. I always learn something new. And I am super excited to hopefully get to do this again with you. And thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your expertise with our audience. It's very much appreciated.
You're welcome.